Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the program. Today we're going to do a little dive into dogs with this research that came out of the Francis Crick Institute in the UK. And the article is titled, "Dogs Could Have Joined Humans More Than Once, Ancient Wolf DNA Has Revealed." There's been a lot made about dog domestication. Initially, the mainstream thought dog domestication was about 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. And then in 1997, they sequenced the genome of gray wolf, and they compared it with that of domesticated dog. And they found that the divergence happened about 100,000 years ago. And at that time, that was a conservative estimate. And there was a lot of heat, a lot of blowback from that. But since then, genetic sequencing of gray wolves expanded, and their scientists gathered more and more information. And that's what this article is mainly about, their analysis of all that new information and some of the conclusions that they're coming to. On this channel, I do cover dogs a lot because a domesticated dog, its history is directly tied to the history of civilized man. You know, dogs don't domesticate themselves. There had to have been a human or a being with intelligence comparable to ours to have done the domesticating. So studying not just domesticated animals, but studying domesticated plants like corn and rice, those histories are directly tied to human civilization. So it's a very interesting subject that has far-reaching implications as far as humans go. So for instance, if 100,000 years ago, dogs really did start becoming domesticated, that was the start point, then you could say, okay, civilization started about 100,000 years ago because, you know, humans must have been there to do it. If you've been keeping up with all the scientific literature and all the evidence and all the speculation and all that stuff, the oldest modern human found confirmed was in West Africa, Jebel Irhoud man, which is about 315,000 years old. There are some individuals like Bruce Fenton who think it goes back further, like 780,000 years. If you look at the history of Cro-Magnon, for example, out of Europe, that's about 50, 60,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, around that time period. This is all during the last ice age. It's very interesting because if you look at a map of where these domesticated dogs are, in terms of like these fossils, where they found them, the remains deliberately buried with other people, with humans, you'd see a very interesting a map of where they are. And most of them come from East Asia or Siberia. I always talk about multidisciplinary studies. If you look at climate data, it would make more sense, right? If for example, Western Europe, if you don't see many dogs come out of there until more recently, maybe it's because there's some sort of a giant block of ice was on top, you know, sitting. Maybe it was inhabitable. Maybe it was a desert. It could be, there could have been some sort of block where no humans could have stayed. So it does offer an eye-opening account of the snapshot of where humans were staying, because of course the world isn't static, right? The world is constantly changing. So goes with the geography and everything. So anyway, I'm bearing the lead here. Let's go on with the article. At some point, dogs diverged from gray wolves under the guidance of domestication. Exactly when and how is something of a mystery. Now ancient DNA, including that of wolves preserved in permafrost for tens of thousands of years, is shedding some light on how wild wolves became some of our best non-human friends. Through this project, we have greatly increased the number of sequenced ancient wolf genomes, allowing us to create a detailed picture of wolf ancestry over time, including around the time of dog origins, explains geneticist Anders Bergstrom, who's from, like I mentioned earlier, the Francis Crick Institute in the UK. So that's the other thing about the history of the domestication of dogs. It was very hard for anybody to have any real lasting input because there was just not that much genetic data out there. You know, as time goes on, there's more and more data that just keeps piling up. This article kind of dissects all that new data. By trying to place a dog piece into this picture, we found that dogs derive ancestry from at least two separate wolf populations, an eastern source and a westerly source. All domestic dogs today belong to the same species, Canis familiaris. All are descended from wolf ancestry shared with today's gray wolf, Canis lupus. So that was the extent of what they knew for a long time. They knew for sure that all dogs came from gray wolves. What they weren't sure of is when and where they were domesticated, and was it a single origin? Was it did they all come from Siberia, or did domestication appear, disappear, and then reappear in other regions? And if domestication is indeed a tool that humans used as survival to develop their civilization or their community, then that stands to reason that, that you can start and stop domestication through time. And that makes total sense. If you release a pig, right? Let's say we have a domesticated pig and then humans get wiped off the planet, or not wiped off the planet, but wiped away from a region for a while. Those pigs are going to revert back to being feral and being just wild pigs, like boars, I suppose, right? But if, let's say, new humans thousands of years later come into that same area, they could re-domesticate those same pigs, those boars. So that the idea of domestication, you could do it through time. Scientists were speculating that. There are some who were on the fringe, but they couldn't really prove it until more information came out, and this is that point now. So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Bergstrom and his colleagues concluded the DNA of 32 dogs dating between 100 and 32,000 years ago. So that's a wide range right there. They found that dogs had diversified by 11,000 years ago, so it had happened before then. It's generally accepted that domestication and therefore diversification began sometime between 40,000 years ago and 20,000 years ago, and likely more than once in different parts of the world. This kind of contradicts a 1997 article there, which goes out on a limb and says the sequence divergence originated more than 100,000 years before the present. I think this is probably more conservative. We know for sure that human activity, like organized human activity, goes back at least 120,000 years, because the Cerruti mastodon site in San Diego, in which the mastodon that they found was found in a processing area that was organized by humans, and they were specifically breaking the bones for its marrow. To me, anyway, that's an indication of some sort of organization, some sort of knowledge that's being applied. If they have something like that, where they could hunt something as big as a mastodon and process it at a designated area and harvest it for specific nutrients or whatever it is, for specific organs, then it wouldn't be a long shot to me for those people to figure out what domestication is, etc. Granted, this is San Diego, and dogs are originating in Siberia, but Siberia and crossing the Bering Strait, actually 100,000 years ago wouldn't have been the Bering Strait, it would have been connected. Beringia would have been a thing back then. So it wouldn't surprise me those people wouldn't bring their dogs over into North America. Anyway, I digress. The sentence here, likely more than once in different parts of the world, again, it adds to the idea that domestication sprung up in different places. I don't know if it was reinvented or if it was just if it was oral knowledge passed on from person to person. It's really too far back into history for us to really know for sure. But, if domestication keeps popping up in different parts of the world, then, why is it starting and stopping like that? Comment on what you guys think about that. The new work is based on 72 ancient wolf genomes, 66 of which have been newly scanned for this analysis, dating back 100,000 years, covering roughly 30,000 generations of wolves across Europe, Siberia, and North America. These were compared against 68 genomes from modern wolves, ancient and modern dogs, and other canid species such as coyotes. Coyotes are closely related to gray wolves, and if you guys want to look up Dan Flores, he has a book called Coyote America. I think he has another book too, American Serengeti, I think. And he talks very deeply about the origins of wolves, how coyotes broke off from wolves as well. And it's a very interesting book if you're interested in animal history. Among the samples were some famous recent finds, including the almost perfectly preserved cub Dogor, locked for 18,000 years in the Siberian permafrost, and the 32,000-year-old head of a wolf, also from the same Siberian permafrost, which is here in the Yakutia region of Siberia. If you guys can see here on this map, it's a pretty big region, but this is where they find a lot of the dogs in pristine condition. And it makes sense because this is one of the only places in the world where you can find permafrost. And, you know, in the remote past, there were people living in this region. So it makes sense that they would find them there. So this is Dogor. This is how pristine it looks. It looks like this puppy was just born a few months ago. Like the fur, you can see the paw, you can see the snout, everything. Very interesting image here. And I also did that video of the 32,000-year-old wolf head. I'll link it in the description in the bottom of this video here. You guys can check it out. But yeah, that wolf was also used in these studies. So the genomes reveal that both the ancient and the modern dogs are more closely related to ancient wolves in Asia than those that lived in Europe. This suggests domestication and diversification may have begun in the East rather than the West. So this makes me think that it's probably started in the East because that's where most of the humans were able to live. If we're talking about the West, 100,000 years ago, it was probably under a huge ice sheet, because if you guys watch the Doggerland video, that's the origin of the North Sea is the melting of those ice sheets around there. So, you know, if there's an ice sheet here, no one's going to be domesticating dogs there. So again, if you think about the climate science and the shifting weather patterns and stuff like that, and if you were to overlay it with, you know, domestication science and its history, they probably would overlap nicely, if I had to guess. Something was odd. Early dogs in northeastern Europe, Siberia, and the Americas derive 100% of their DNA from an eastern population of wolves. Early dogs in the Middle East, Africa, and South of Europe have a DNA contribution from wolves related to modern populations in Southeast Eurasia. Dogs were domesticated more than once in different parts of the world. However, it could also mean that dogs were domesticated first in the East, then mixed with a population of wild wolves. So this stands out to me because one of two things, or these don't even have to be mutually exclusive, I don't think. Let's go back to the map here. So one of two things could have happened, or both of these scenarios could have happened. A bunch of dogs are domesticated here, and then people took their dogs and migrated with them, and then they were introduced in a more westerly direction, and then those dogs were probably, you know, their genetics were passed, and who knows, maybe they crossbred them with wolves. It could have been done that way, or the people here stayed put, and they somehow the knowledge transferred to the people here, and then they implemented those domestication techniques and rose the dogs up in the West. They're not, you know, there's not enough information to know for sure, but and that's a huge step from 25, 30 years ago when they didn't know anything about dogs. The study also allowed the team to learn more about ancient wolves and their evolution. In particular, they traced a gene variant that went from being very rare to almost ubiquitous over a period of about 10,000 years. This mutation affects a gene called IFT88, the development of head and jaw bones, which is still present in almost every dog and wolf today. They suspect that this is probably natural selection. A type of prey may have been made available, so they had to evolve accordingly, right? So, for example, maybe there were dogs that were hunting ground gophers or something like that, and then the ice age happened, and then now they have to hunt birds or something like that, and so they have to change. Their physical attributes will change, right? You can see this in dogs today, right? Like, look at the dachshund, the wiener dog. They're specifically bred to hunt for those gophers, right? To go into like deep holes in the ground, and so their body changes accordingly. So that's the idea that they're talking about. But in this situation, it's their jaw and their head. This is the first time scientists have directly tracked natural selection in a large animal over a timescale of 100,000 years, seeing evolution play out in real time rather than trying to reconstruct it from DNA today. I wouldn't call it evolution. I'd probably call it, like a selection or adaptation, because evolution, that's too much of a loaded word. In 100,000 years, I don't think is enough time to really evolve. But I understand what he's saying. We found several cases where mutations spread to the whole wolf species, which was possible because the species was highly connected over large distances. This connectivity is perhaps the reason why wolves managed to survive the Ice Age while so many other large carnivores vanished. And that's another thing that Dan Flores covers in his books is, like, for example, the North American horse. Horses were native to North America, and then they went to other continents, and then they went extinct in North America after the Younger Dryas, and then they were reintroduced later. So perhaps something similar happened with dogs or wolves. And wolves were the way they work, the way they survive. They travel in packs, and they're very, very elusive, and they're really hard to kill off completely. The next stage of the research is to try to further narrow down which wolves were the ancestors of modern dogs. So there's going to be a constant stream of new analysis and research of this of the history of dogs and their genetics, and who knows what they'll find. But I don't expect this to be the last video on this. They're probably going to be able to pinpoint more locations of where it started up, and it might even go back even further. Because again, think about the Jebel Irhoud man. He's a modern human. What do you guys think? Do you guys think humans and dogs, their histories are probably the same or close together? Or did it take 200,000 years for humans to realize that they could domesticate dogs, or 250,000 years, whatever you want to call it? So let me know what you guys think about this. I'll have the links in the description. I'll talk to you guys later.